this. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to all our comrades around the world to the Socialist Sunday Stream.
Okay, I think that the song has finished. Hello everyone.
There you go.
We're here today with Beau from the Fifth Column, who has a YouTube channel and is a journalist. And we have Javi and Paul as usual. And
Hey.
yeah, today we want to talk about Venezuela, a bit about the military. And yeah, we're really happy to have Beau with us. You have such an awesome YouTube channel. I'm always so impressed how concisely you're able to express ideas, and like you never have editing or rarely ever have editing in your videos. You can just talk off the cuff so well. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your channel and how you got started on YouTube and yeah, your work as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of relevant here what we're going to be talking about. Yeah, so I was a military contractor, a consultant, advisor, whatever term you want to use, and we're going to get into the different types, I assume, in this conversation. After a while, it, like many people, decided it wasn't for me. And with the skill that I had, when you take away shooting the gun, journalism is a really nice fit for what you're good at, what you know. So I became a journalist, and during that time, I often hid my accent. One night I was drinking with some colleagues, the accent slipped out, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're a hillbilly," and I'm like, "Yeah, thanks, yeah, that's true." And it kind of like they encouraged me to make a joke. Like a video showcasing my accent, because I typically covered international affairs, and they thought it would be a good gag for people to understand that their international affairs expert sounds like a dude from Deliverance. So I made the video as a joke, and it took off. Like, people started watching it, and then I made a couple more and threw in a little bit of social commentary, trying to capitalize on it, and in the sense of getting those ideas out to people that would normally listen to them. And then it grew and grew and grew. I mean, what was funny was I actually had to walk back my accent, because that first video, it was a joke, and I played it up like a whole lot. Like I had overalls on, drinking a beer, dip, and so I was like, man. So I had to walk it back to the way I normally talk. But that's how the channel came into being. It actually started as a joke, and now it's obviously not. It's definitely turned into something a little more serious. But yeah, it was a very bizarre twist of fate and chain of events that led from where I was to here. So
Is that video still available now for us?
it's on Facebook, on I think my personal profile. Like all this stuff started on my personal profile, but I think it's still there. I didn't take them down. And then like even some of the original ones on the Facebook page, because the Facebook page started before the YouTube channel. Some of those you can definitely, I'm still playing it up, because it was still supposed to be, at this point, it was a joke for my core readership who knew me. So there were a lot of times like I'm playing the part of the dumb hillbilly and everything, and they know that it's not real. And now looking back at those videos, I'm like, embarrassed by them. I'm like, man. But it is what it is, and I don't want to take them down, because I think it's important for people to get that transition. When they when they can see it for themselves, it makes a little more sense than me trying to explain it.
I think that's brilliant. And
Also, you're joking, right? And it's cool. It's all right. It's not like you're being offensive to yourself or something.
No. I mean, it was honestly the first one. There was this crazy militia guy that was talking about like replacing the Secret Service and protecting Trump at this rally. And I made a video. And in that one, I was more mocking him at the same time, because I'm like, that's not a good idea, carrying a bunch of guns up near the president. That sounds like that could go real bad. Um, and so, I mean, there's a lot of like, I guess, cultural humor from the South that people from the South would get, but I don't know that it translated well to everybody else. But again, it was for my readership from my journalism. It wasn't supposed to be a big thing. And then I did the one with about burning my kids' shoes during that Nike boycott thing, and that went everywhere. Like that went out because people couldn't really tell if I was being serious or not, and it got shared to people who had no idea who I was. And that was the point when I was like, oh man, I've got to tone this down because now people are confused about who I am, it kind of came out of nowhere, and I was like, man.
That's brilliant. And how did you decide? So, what was the transition from being a military consultant to becoming a journalist? Was it more of like a philosophical change of mind, or like in terms of morals, or was there like a specific event or something that happened, or information that you found out?
It was, well, I mean, I was always very anti-authoritarian and very in line with my current beliefs. However, I also maybe had a little bit more moral flexibility when I was younger. And as it progressed, I started going more and more private, doing more stuff for private companies and stuff like that, and stuff that was more in line with my beliefs. That led to a federal investigation. um, and the funny thing is, I had actually already stopped, and I was already like transitioning away from that industry when the investigation kicked off. And it was just like, perfect karma in the sense of, oh, you think you're done, but you're not. You still need to go sit down for a couple years and wait. So, I mean, that's what happened. And then coming out immediately, I had job offers, and I was like, I really, really don't want to go back to that line of work.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, when you take away what I was really good at, which is taking a bunch of information, distilling it into something that can be presented in a couple of minutes, gathering the information, interviewing people, and shooting a gun. You take away the gun, you're a journalist. I mean, that's really the job. And I'm like, okay. So I started applying, and a small outlet. First, I got a couple of photographs on CNN's news site, and then a small outlet out of Canada, Digital Journal, was like, sure, we'll give you a shot. And it started from there. And it is a small outlet, and then it grew, and I went to other places, and eventually wound up with the Fifth Column, and helped found that little co-op, and then we're here. I was actually still the editor of the Fifth Column when these videos took off, and now the Fifth Column is just kind of waiting for me to get back to putting it together on a daily basis. But that is probably going to take some time because I don't know. I don't want to abandon it because it was a good project and it saved a couple other small outlets in the process. But I mean, at this point, I don't have time to run it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's totally fair enough. And do you have any particular, like, I guess your experience with journalism must be really interesting because you speak sometimes about, the media and different forms of indoctrination, and the fact that a lot of what we hear is just propaganda to get us to support whatever thing the US wants, people to do, or other Western powers. And so, do you find it difficult as a journalist to like get your, I don't know, was there like an ethical dilemma there when you wanted to get into journalism, but thought, okay, if I want to do this, I might have to sort of sell my soul in terms of what I'm saying?
I've always been really idealistic, and I was one of those people that was like, "Yay, I can change it from the inside," and I love a challenge. And I learned really quickly that, I mean, that's why I wound up in independent media because that's not happening. That's
Yeah.
that's a losing fight. Um, but I had a lot of freedom at Digital Journal, and then from there, I got picked up by Anti-Media, which now they got hit with censorship on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere, and it really hurt their reach. But at the time, it was a pretty big outlet for an indie outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then from there, I mean, I wrote for during this time, I had articles that wound up on a whole bunch of different outlets, even some that were mainstream. Um, I even had one that it got reworked because I don't really buy into the whole IP thing, so I released all of my writing under Creative Commons. Um, I had one that got reworked and wound up on Blaze, which y'all may not know, but it's like a super right wing outlet, and I was like, man, I need to rethink this Creative Commons thing. and then one showed up on Infowars, and I was like, oh no, 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 no. Um, so then I moved to it's still available, and we very rarely turn anybody down. But basically, it's you send the email, and 99.9% of the time, it's go right ahead. But this prevents my name from showing up near Alex Jones's, which is a high priority for me. Um,
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, well, I guess we can get into today's topic a little bit, in terms of the fact that we wanted to talk about Venezuela and all the things that are happening right now. But yeah, I guess maybe a good place to start would be differentiating between different types of, like, is it mercenaries and the consultant? That was the distinction that you were making, and different types of military consultants, right?
Right. So when people think of contracting or mercenaries, whatever the term is that you want to use, I honestly don't care. There's a lot of people that have a hard opinion about that. I don't. I just, whatever the term is, I want it to be applied consistently, not mercenary for the people you don't like and contractor for the people you do. But so you have, generally speaking, when you're talking about it in contractor slang, and these terms are 15 years old, but you have white contracting, and that's the stuff that's like that everybody knows about, like Blackwater and stuff like that. It is all within the rules, and not saying that the guys behave within the rules, but as far as their home country is concerned, it's all approved. It's for a government agency. It's for a U.S. government agency, or whatever the home country is. It's all above board. There's nothing illegal about it in the home country. So that's white contracting. And then you have black contracting, which is where it's not approved by anybody and it's probably illegal. Which, yeah. And then you have gray contracting, which is kind of in the middle of those two. And it's more used for either doing something without permission that is for a good cause, something that would be like universally good, like the guys who go and help the anti-poaching task force in Africa and stuff like that. That's contracting. It's not approved. It's probably technically illegal,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody cares. Another good example of that would be if a special forces guy, U.S. special forces guy, got out of the military, and when he was in, he met some SAS guys, and they call him up and they're like, hey, can you come teach us about this? And he goes and does it without permission. Technically, that's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
However, the U.S. government is not going to care that he was training the British. Now, if the same thing went down and it was for Maduro, that guy would go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's that
Yeah.
there's a little bit of ambiguity there. And then there are also ethics within the contracting community. There are a lot of white contractors, which sound like the good guys, that are horrible people. And there are a lot of black contractors who are have a code of ethics. Like, they won't work for mining companies. They won't, there are certain things that they will and won't do. So the public image of the industry is not entirely accurate, because they aren't all monetarily motivated. A lot of them have an ideological component to what they do. And then aside from that, when we think of contractors, we think of like people who tote a gun, because that's what's, but there's also helicopter mechanics. There's, right now, I guarantee you, there are a whole bunch of virologists that are contracted with the Ministry of Defense or the Department of Defense. Technically, they're military contractors. They're, you wouldn't ever think of them that way, but they would be encompassed in that community.
Yeah, and information security and journalists and whatnot,
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of types of contracting that don't really get thought of. Most of the time, people either think of Blackwater or the guys that went to Venezuela. I mean, those are the two extremes.
I have another name for the guys that went to Venezuela, but I'm not going to say it publicly.
But there are a lot of appropriate names for them.
Right?
Because, man, but, I mean, everybody knows about how bad the planning is on all of that, and how bad everything was, and how just all of the ridiculousness involved in it. I just want to point out that from a contracting perspective, as far as what you would get paid, $50,000 is not enough to overthrow a Taco Bell, much less. I mean, that's no. I mean, because what happened to those guys is a very real possibility.
Why would you want to overthrow a Taco Bell unless you were a worker there?
Right. Right.
I would need that shit even if they made me.
That's what I really don't understand, though. They must have been aware that that wasn't enough money to be able to achieve what they set out to achieve. They must have, I mean, people working in that industry, there must be smart people. So why, I don't know, is it some sort of Trojan horse or like fig leaf to for something?
There are normally, okay, for every professional contractor out there, for every person that actually is very good at what they do, they're very conscientious about what they do. There are two that don't care, they're just in it for the paycheck. And then there's one who should not be doing that kind of work because they don't think things through. The way this looks is that it looks like the guy that actually ran the company, he had a contract with the opposition in Venezuela. And the total contract amount was for like 212 mil. That's more in range of what it would take to do something like this. And then there was the additional bonus of the U.S. government would give him 15 mil for the bounty that they've placed on Maduro. Mm-hmm. So, okay, fine. However, they received, as far as we know, they received $50,000 and started to work. That, anybody who had ever engaged in this before would tell you that that's just completely unacceptable, because you don't get benefits, you don't have death benefits, you don't have any of that stuff. You get at least half of the money up front. Mm-hmm. I think this guy had read up, and again, this is a guess, back in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of contractors that worked in Africa, and what they did was they worked not really on spec, because they got a whole bunch of money up front and they got paid monthly, but they did it in exchange for like a percentage of the mining rights from this area, or timber rights, or something like that. And I think that's what he was angling for long run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that doesn't happen anymore. That's stuff from history. That's not a thing that occurs much anymore. And then I kind of believe that the guys that are actually on the ground, they're caught now. I don't know that they were told the whole truth. Watching their videos since their capture, they're behaving as if they thought the cavalry was coming, like that they were the advance for an official sanctioned U.S. operation, which from everything that we've seen, that is not the case. But these guys, none of them, to my knowledge, had ever actually contracted on something like this before, which is very. I mean, you're going from being regular army to doing something that not just is in the contracting world, but it's like a crazy thing in the contracting world. Like this is something that should have been, if it would, nobody should have taken this unless they had been contracting for a decade and really understood what they were doing, because working for a regular army and doing it privately is very, very, very different. I actually am amazed that Maduro took execution off the table. I
The thing with the government in Venezuela, they have like a terrible reputation because of all of the propaganda and all. But actually, the government in Venezuela is super moderate, and super bland in their. They have the reputation of being communist and dictators.
The communists
and,
hate them.
And
like the actual communists hate them.
Yeah, and they're actually like a very social democratic type of thing. They're not what they are painted to be.
Even in very liberal countries, when you try to kidnap or assassinate the president, it would seem like execution would be on the table,
Yeah.
And they're not doing it. They've hit them with very moderate charges. I know people looking at the sentence are like, that's not really moderate. It is, considering what they were doing. I mean, like if somebody had planned this in the U.S., 30 years would be the minimum, not the maximum. So I actually think that I think they may even be returned. I think Venezuela may actually kind of show that the propaganda isn't accurate and take that extra step. I don't think they're going to get off scot-free, but I think that they may be returned a whole lot sooner than we're imagining right now.
I mean, they may be valuable as leverage, like for diplomatic reasons and whatnot, to ease a little bit the tensions. And in a way, maybe under Hugo Chavez, I would be more likely to think that this kind of thing would have happened, that more harsh measures would have been taken. But I'm under the impression that the Maduro government is more concerned with civilian issues and with keeping the economy afloat, considering all the awful blockade that the United States is making on them and whatnot. So I think that's partly it. But I'm working a little bit on general impressions and intuitions, because I read so many contradictory things about Venezuela. It's very difficult to figure out what is what. But I tend to trust the legitimate government, President Maduro.
Because I generally speaking, if you're an opposition party and you need contractors to do the job, you can't get allied countries and stuff like that to help you out after they've kind of said you're the good guys. You may not be the good guys. So I mean, I would definitely, that was one of the things we were talking about as far as in a video I did that kind of loosely covered this, because I didn't want to like disrupt this interview, but these guys, their actions on behalf of the opposition is what it appears to be. It should show that the opposition doesn't have the loyalty of the people, and the Maduro's government does. It's certainly the way I'm reading it.
There's a little bit of nuance in the way that there's many different parties in the opposition. There's an opposition that is like moderate right wing that wants to do like the electoral process and whatnot, and there's an opposition that is these fantastic fantasy based crazy people that they're on the flavors of the Bolsonaros, the Donald Trumps and whatnot, that they have like no grounds on reality, and they wanna like this Juan Guaido, this guy that because he said so and his holy genitals said so, declared himself interim president of Venezuela, and he's been trying failing miserably. By the way, his signature was one of apparently in those contracts for these contractors. So, but it's complex. It's very complex. Like there's a right wing, there's an opposition that wants to play with the rules, and there's an opposition. There's a few actors in the opposition that are like fantasy based and crazy. Sorry about the ableist language. Fantasy based right wing people, like I like to call them. Like they don't care about the physical realities of the world. They just go like, my image and my narrative, and they try to aggrandize and fool as many people as they can, and there's not so many falling for the trap, because the whole Bolivarian current took so many people out of poverty, and these people are grateful for it. So, and it's very difficult, for them to democratically gain any ground.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that definitely makes a whole lot of sense, especially given the fact that most of the economic devastation, I don't want to say all, and I mean, this is just me looking at it. Most of what's going on right now is related to sanctions. It's not something that's inherent in the economy. It's something that's being forced on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then another aspect when we're talking about the contracting there is that Venezuela's government has Russian contractors there, and who are the ones who trained their intel guys. And I do think I think that when all of this comes to a head and the diplomatic stuff starts happening, it's probably going to occur through Putin. It'll go, Maduro and the U.S. will speak through Putin to get it done, because his contractors are there and they're advising at a high level, and they are the professional contractors that know what they're doing. So I can see that, and I think people are going to freak out again because there's going to be this weird connection between Trump and Putin again. But I just want to say before that kicks up that it's more than likely related to the contractors that Venezuela has through Wagner, which is that Russian company. So I don't necessarily see that as conspiratorial when it's because it's probably going to happen. That's because generally speaking, contractors don't want other contractors, even if they have done something incredibly stupid, to suffer a horrible fate, even if they're on the opposing team. So I have a feeling that the Russian contractors there will actually be very sympathetic and try to help as much as they can, because there is kind of a weird gentleman's agreement going on.
It's kind of a prestige problem, like for the whole community of contractors, we could say.
Oh yeah. There are a whole bunch. There are contractors that are like, we don't want to call these guys contractors. We want to call them mercenaries, simply because they're embarrassing. Like what they did was embarrassing. And I'm still of the opinion that I think the guys down there really thought that they were working on something very secretive for the U.S. government and didn't really know that they had. It seems like they've been had. It seems like they were tricked by the company that sent them down there. And that's just a hunch. I could be wrong about that. But their behavior is not that of contractors when they're caught. Because as a contractor, nobody's coming to get you. So you either become very defiant or very cooperative. These guys have stuck to what U.S. POWs are trained to do. So it seems like they think that they're working for the U.S. government, and the U.S. government, no government agency would sign off on something this ridiculous, and they would have money to back it up. The U.S. government agencies are known for doing stupid stuff and signing off on dumb plans, but they're funded. Mm-hmm. This wasn't funded. If there is something a tie to the administration, it would probably be more like Giuliani in Ukraine. It's this unofficial thing from one of Trump's buddies. He encouraged it, something like that. I can see that, but I do not think that State Department would have approved this, just because they're very they're very restrictive on what they would approve, and I don't see this as being something that they would back, because it doesn't have a high chance of success. Not for moral reasons. If there was a crew that came to them and was like, "Hey, we can realign Venezuela to be our buddies," they might approve it if it was a workable plan. This was not, and they're also already investigating the company, because it appears that they did a whole lot of stuff without State Department authorization, and there's a probe into that. If they come back getting indicted for that stuff, it's guaranteed that state did not approve it, and I would imagine that's going to happen.
It's interesting, though, to situate all of this in terms of what the US has and other Western powers have done throughout the globe. In terms of, I think a lot of people still unaware, and probably because of the type of history that we're taught, of how many places throughout the world, in Honduras, Panama, Vietnam, Iran, etc. We have, or the US in particular, has had deliberately put in place coups to get rid of democratically elected leaders, and then put in place people who are pro-US and pro-US intervention and privatization and all of these things that are good for the economy and for corporations, in particular for the US economy and corporations.
Sorry, Catherine. "Quote unquote" good for the economy. Very many air quotes there.
Good for the richest.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
And then also the fact that Venezuela has the largest oil reserve, and I think a lot of this is not what we are getting in the media at all when it comes to what's going on. We're just hearing that Maduro is just like this evil man, even though I also read that in Venezuela they have one of the fairest democracy, electoral processes.
Yeah, it's been externally vetted as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it has a lot of controls and whatnot. It's not about the facts. It's always about the narrative.
Yeah,
so it's about telling a story about a bad guy and a good guy, and the good guy is always the United States, obeying the orders of the IMF and whatnot, and the bad guys are just everybody else who dares to do something different,
And
sorry, you go ahead.
Sorry, no, carry on. Cool.
No, I was just gonna say, there's so much support for socialism in Venezuela. 75% of Venezuelans in 2017 report from Venezuelan analysis shows that 75% of Venezuelans support socialism. Some people have criticisms of Maduro and Chavismo and stuff like that, but the facts don't, the numbers don't lie. They've got the support, and
they're not even socialist. In a way, they have a very capitalist economy.
They're bringing 30% state ownership, isn't it? 70% of their economy is private.
What these very bold people dared to do was just daring to put some social measures to take people out of poverty and making public a few key industries. That's as far as it gets.
And the thing is, generally when contracting first started, it started as a way for the government to maintain plausible deniability. So they would use people that weren't connected to the government in any way, and that's what they would do. So it would allow them to engage in those coups and those realignments and stuff like that without having their fingerprints on it. The fact that all of these guys were special forces, all of them knew each other from the army, all of them, there's this very plain trail, kind of shows that it actually, as much as it looks like it was government, it wasn't. However, at the same time, it's part of the problem that's occurred since Iraq. Since 2003 is when it really kicked off, the corporatization of contracting. It's, we talk about corporatization and how it's bad in a whole lot of ways, but even in something as bizarre as contracting, it has really caused a lot of problems, because now, You have these major companies making financial decisions. A lot of them have never pulled a trigger. They have never been in the field. They don't know what they're doing, and they can sign on for something like this. The fact that this was just a little thing is lucky. Eventually, something is going to happen like this, but it's going to be a big company that does it. And it's something that we, especially in the West, need to pay attention to, because contracting has become a very integral part of foreign policy and international relations post 9/11. And it shouldn't be. The whole idea behind contracting was for very, very special situations. I mean, incredibly unique situations where you wouldn't want to use your military. The fact that it has become so widespread that you now have contractors and the military working side by side, even guys that would leave the military and then come back as a contractor and be in the same office as they were before, that's going to cause a lot of problems, because at that point, that line between official military and those that crutch of being able to say, I'm doing it for my country, it's not for a paycheck, all of that stuff, it starts disappearing real quick when you're sitting there working with a guy who is doing it for a paycheck. And I think they're going to have a lot of problems.
And many people in the military are pressed because of poverty conditions. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that gives away, I think, this school was basically private, not done by the state. You know, could be that they chose this type of quote unquote assault on the Venezuelan coast instead of what they've done in Bolivia, for instance. There's like more judicial, what they call what's the name for it? You know, they call it lawfare, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's lately like the trend, like the weapon of choice to topple governments not wanted by the global, bosses. Let's say, because we always say the United States of America, but in a way, I don't think the United States of America have that power anymore by themselves. I think the United States of America is operating for other kind of, let's say, I don't know, economical global powers, like multinational corporations that operate everywhere, that want the resources and whatnot, which is like, used to be like all this stuff with that fruit company back in the day, in the early 20th century. And but it kind of seems like with from then to now, it's kind of the tables have turned, and kind of the states service the corporations, if you know what I'm saying.
I wouldn't really disagree with that, because there are times, if we're going to keep the focus on contracting, there are times when a private company, and I'm just going to say oil company X, needs contractors, and State Department will approve it. There's literally no U.S. government reason to be involved in this, but state will approve it based on the oil company's needs. That's new. That's a post 9/11 development. Primarily, normally when you had civilians that did that kind of stuff before, they were CIA. They weren't they weren't contractors for real. They were government employees. So seeing that's a new development, and it does show that the corporations have started to outweigh the state in a lot of decision making.
And do you have any specific insight into how this relates to disaster capitalism and that whole phenomenon that Naomi Klein talks about in the shock doctrine, where they go into a country maybe with military force, or take advantage of some kind of natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, and then use it to buy up land to add cheaper prices or just profit, generally privatize everything. I don't know if how that intersects with what you're talking about.
It definitely that occurs with a lot of the black contracting, the unapproved stuff, especially in areas that are very resource rich. that don't necessarily have super stable governments.
Yeah.
Those countries, when they get destabilized, you always see guys show up that are not locals,
Yeah.
and they're there protecting the assets of a company, or they're there to devalue an area, and make it cheaper for a company to buy it. That's also something that has happened. That's less rare, that doesn't happen as often, but it's happened. We've heard of it. And then, yeah, there are also situations when let's say there's a fire in the Amazon, and there's an indigenous village nearby. There might be contractors sent in there to say, okay, you guys have to move. It's for your own safety. It's not. You need to get out, and then a company buy that area because they want whatever's under it, or that that occurs. So it does play into it, but it's more of a minor thing. It's not the contracting companies wanting to do it. For them, it's just a job.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of contractors that won't do that kind of work. You're starting since as the as contracting has become more corporatized, you've seen a lot of the private contractors, the people that are really just, because back in the day, it was just dudes who knew each other. It wasn't even a company. And eventually they had companies, and then it became like a huge corporate endeavor. But those small outfits, you're seeing them start to have more and more ethics about what they do, because they want to differentiate themselves from the large corporate gigs. They don't want to be associated with that. And it's funny that it's typically today, it's more the black contractors, the guys that are doing it without authorization, that are doing it in ways that are technically illegal, that they're displaying the most ethics, which is, it's kind of funny in a way. Because there are people that will not work for mining companies. They won't do relocation operations of indigenous people, and they won't engage in that kind of stuff, because they realize that that's not what they signed up for. Most of the time they sign up for adventure, or they have some ideological reason, or they're just bored. A lot of contractors are just bored, and they get involved, and next thing you know, they're in Central Africa and they enjoy it, so they stick on. But normally they're not. We have that image of them as like people who are ready to kill all the time and all of that, and this Arnold Schwarzenegger vibe. That's not the case. At the end of the day, they're all, anybody who's picking up a gun while contracting, they're ready to kill for money. But it's not actually a huge part of it. It's more, that's like an afterthought. They're more about either their ideological reason for doing it, the money, or they're just bored. Generally, these are normal guys. You do occasionally run across the crazy folk. That does happen. And when I say that, I mean that literally. People that should not be engaged in this stuff, that should not do it because they have mental health issues.
Also, don't you think that focusing too much on what the contractors do, it's gonna, it's like when we focus on corruption, like on corrupt politicians, we never focus on the corrupter, on the person who bought that service. So could we should maybe also, or even more, focus on the people who are hiring these contractors to do whatever thing they're doing, to be accountable for these things?
Absolutely. Because if contracting was not a huge issue prior to 9/11, prior to Iraq, really, but it wasn't a huge thing. It wasn't as pervasive, and that was because it wasn't normalized. It still occurred. There were still contractors. There were small private outfits, but they had to be held accountable if they were caught. There was a whole lot to it. And today, the the people hiring them can often get that approval to have them do a job that they really shouldn't. And if you want to curtail that activity before it gets way out of hand, and it's not out of hand yet, it's just getting close. It's the people who hire them who you have to curtail, and you have to hold them accountable for it. The problem is a lot of the companies that hire them are raw resource. They're engaged in extraction of resources. So the consumer doesn't really have a way to like boycott or complain because it goes into so many different items. But should be more oversight of this. With the Brits, you guys actually do a really, really good job keeping your contractors in check. You don't hear about British contractors out doing something stupid. I mean, mainly they're all SAS, so they're a higher caliber. They're very bright, they're very well trained. But it's very rare in modern times to find them engaged in something really out there, and it's because it's more heavily regulated. In the sense of, if you get busted doing something outside of this, you're in a lot of trouble. not just a little bit. And I think that may be a step the U.S. would want to take. I don't know that it will, because there's too much money being made by it, and it's very advantageous for these large companies to have trigger pullers at their disposal.
And do you think it's the case that as soon as there's any kind of regulation, they might just go to another country where there's more favourable conditions for doing their business, and so they wouldn't want to lose that money as much as possible? So it wouldn't really solve the problem in a lot of ways.
I think that would the companies themselves may entertain that. However, the contractors they want to hire are Americans. And if the company moves and becomes
Hi, Beau.
The siren is so loud around here.
If the company moves and becomes a Chinese company, and then ex-American soldiers go to work for that company, that becomes really illegal. So that's actually, as far as even just giving advice, like these guys were doing in Colombia, just that has to be approved by State Department because it's a foreign country, and they wouldn't get the look the other way thing that the British would, or the Canadians, or the Australians. That would happen if companies started moving overseas to get contractors to work for them to avoid the regulation. The individual person is still going to be held accountable in the U.S. for working without State Department approval. Or they should, in theory. I mean, over the last few years has led me to doubt that any of these rules actually matter anymore. But it is what it is, and it's an industry that's existed for thousands of years. It's changed over time, but I would point out that when you talk about the great empires falling, it occurred around the same time they began to heavily privatize their military and rely on contractors or mercenaries or whatever. So it's actually, as much as the American patriot guys love to talk about it and say, oh, this is super cool, they're private people out there doing America's foreign policy and all that, it's actually really bad for the U.S. So yeah.
And stuff that you privatize ends up being like, okay, being selfish, for the country. Stuff that you privatize ends up being more expensive than stuff that you run publicly. Choose up more of the budget, right?
Yeah. That's one of the things that is a huge issue right now, is that the U.S. military, to train a Green Beret, you're talking about $100,000. You're talking about $100,000 to train them, and it takes years.
Damn.
And then they get a couple of years out of service of them, and then they hop out. And if they're smart, they can take that training and make 5 times what their pay for the U.S. military is. So that's something that they have to consider and then there's also the aspect of them going to a private company and then being hired back by DoD at a higher rate, even though they paid for all the training. So there's a whole lot when you start talking about the actual finances of it, especially in relationship to how the U.S. military actually pays for the training that they end up then recruiting contractors to use and paying insane prices for. That, as far as using the training, that's not going to really disappear. But maybe if DoD didn't hire their own people back, it might curtail some of it. But I mean, again, it's an industry that's going through a lot of changes because of corporate takeover, takeover of being a mercenary.
Because it's not the same like a private, like an independent person contractor who works in a small family business or whatever than a corporate contractor. Right.
They are very, very different.
Yeah.
Very different. They behave differently. Everything is different. And I can tell you right now, if I'm somewhere and I'm captured and I'm being held hostage, and my choice is between one of the huge firms like Blackwater or one of the tiny firms of buddies that, out there in Virginia, I would want the little guys, because they're going to be more cautious. They're going to try to limit loss of life. They're going to be better than a large organization. That was one of the things about contracting in the beginning. It was a very tight-knit community, and that became a company. And now these guys don't know each other. They don't have any loyalty to each other. It's very different. And I think it's a bad thing. I think not just for contracting in general, not just for the contractors, not just for foreign policy, not just for the people that are going to be impacted. The only people that actually make out on this are the stockholders. It's
like
bad for
yet another professional culture being contaminated by culture, by corporate bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quelle surprise! Sorry.
A lot of this really reminds me as well of John Perkins' books, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And yeah, he talks a lot about how these economic hitmen are basically trained to go into countries, and then they talk to democratically elected leaders, and they try and convince them by inflating statistics about how good it would be for them to allow, to make some deal with the US. And then if they don't agree, then they'll threaten them or send military violence or something like that. And the one element of it that I thought was really interesting, which related to what you were saying about these contractors not being, these evil men that we might think, at least, the bad ones, is that how he talked about how they kind of really psychologically profiled who would be the best person to target based on his family history and how he'd been raised and stuff like that, and also just the amount of indoctrination that was like, this is good, you're doing good for the world, even if a lot of people die. US democracy is so important, we need to spread these ideas everywhere, kind of like we're still the kind of propaganda that we're still getting today about how communism is bad and all of that. So yeah, it's just really interesting how these people are manipulated. But I would definitely recommend checking out those books or the YouTube videos by John online if people haven't seen that already. But was that something that you were aware of when you were working as a military consultant, like this idea of economic hitmen, or even today how this like intersects with military consultants?
That honestly, the economic considerations came into it from my perspective only once. Like basically, if we saw a country that was going bad economically, we knew that we would end up there. That was. I'm still not really plugged into the whole economy aspects of it. But it was more of a cue to us that something that we may need to start paying attention to this area or start reading about it and making sure that we're up to speed. More so than a facet of what was done. So I mean, yes, we were aware that the two things were related, but I don't think that many people actually connected it as cause and effect. And that maybe that there was actually somebody further down the chain that triggered the dominoes to start falling. Um, yeah, and then yeah, I mean, because they are, generally speaking, they are normal guys, and they're more akin to your average soldier than people would imagine. They don't actually, they really aren't. I've met very, very few that are the gung ho Rambo, let's go do this type of thing outside of when it's actually time to go do it. Um, they don't sit around and hope that they get to go do something bad to somebody. Um, it's and there's also a lot of ethical dilemmas that people face. In fact, one of this is an entertaining story too. Um, I'm at a cookout. I'm at a barbecue, and there's a guy. He has done nothing but white contracting for a very well known company, and he got hired, or he got a job offer from a company that does stuff without approval. And to show that it's not like this idea that it's, this real tight group anymore, this guy, we're at this barbecue, and it just so happened that as I said this, the lull in the conversation hit, and I'm like, I know a lot of black contractors, and I mean, they're decent guys. I mean, I got a lot of black contractor friends. I mean, they're all criminals, and I'm going through this, and I want you to imagine how that would sound to somebody who doesn't know the terminology. But and like everybody's sitting there staring at me, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, I didn't get it till quite a while later that they didn't realize that wasn't referencing skin tone. But yeah, he was very concerned about it, even though it was actually doing the same job. But there's a lot of ethical considerations because a lot of these guys really still are, they view themselves as American soldiers more so than they would view themselves as mercenaries or even contractors. A lot of them like the term private military because then they can still say, oh no, I work for DOD. Kinda, I guess, but again, the culture is changing, and all of this is based on 10, 15 years ago. What it's like today, I would imagine the corporatization has gotten a whole lot worse. Um, and I would imagine that there are a lot more, I don't want to say amateur, but that's the best word for it. There are a lot more people that are fighting to get jobs because Iraq is winding down, Afghanistan's winding down. All of these hotspots where they made all of this money are going away. So there's a lot of people fighting to get jobs, and a lot of them were able to get a job in Iraq because Blackwater would basically hire any person and hand them a rifle and put them on a sentry duty, basic guard details or protect a convoy, something very simple. Now they're fighting for jobs like overthrowing a country that they're probably maybe not qualified for. And it's unique. And one thing, as I'm saying this, I want to point out that I'm talking about the way things are, not the way things should be.
Yeah.
We probably shouldn't be doing a whole lot of this. But it is what it is. And I think we're going to start seeing a whole lot more incidents like Venezuela because, I mean, there's money, and the old job locations are drying up. They can't get those contracts anymore, and they're going to be looking for work elsewhere. And I think we're going to see a lot of it in South America and Africa, particularly.
So say a good revolutionary angle would be to give these people other kinds of jobs that don't have to necessarily be as contractors, right?
Right. It really would. That would be a method of changing what they do. because there are the skills when you're talking about the high-end contractors, the skills are transferable to a whole lot of stuff, because in order to do that, you have to be well informed about a lot of stuff. You have to learn how to educate yourself. You have to, and one of the other tropes is that you see these contractors that went to Ukraine, and they're most of them, they got like swastikas and stuff like that. That is incredibly uncommon. That doesn't happen, generally speaking, because when you're traveling the world and doing stuff like that, you have to be diverse. You depend on people of different skin tones and with different language skills and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So all of this together creates people that could be very useful in civilian society once they transition, um, because they do look at things from a solution based mentality. Okay, this is the problem. Now we got to fix it, and that they're trained to do it constantly. And there are a lot of companies that could benefit from hiring a contractor not to do security but to do logistics. And it would save them a fortune.
Yeah.
Um, there's a whole bunch of jobs these guys could do that don't involve guns.
Do you by any chance know like any organization that does these things, like relocate people from those jobs into?
I don't even know that one exists. There are companies, like there's a place called Clearance Jobs that tends to focus on non-field type of contracting, so people can kind of move out into office jobs, that would also work. But I don't think that's actually their mission. I don't think they're doing it out of a revolutionary idea. I think they're doing it just because the office jobs are easier to get, and those are the positions they're filling.
I remember like very long ago, like some of these people were recycled into pirates and in poorer countries. Could be.
Yeah. There are a whole lot of people who start, they start in the military, or they start in some other branch of government, or they start contracting for one of those, and then they move to private contracting, and then they end up in some form of criminal endeavor. That occurs a lot. Sometimes it's piracy. That is one. A lot of them get into moving illicit substances. And then
Yeah,
you have,
working for the cartels, right? Don't
yeah,
do it, people. Don't work for the cartels. They suck. They're
yeah.
very bad governments. Just
Yeah,
saying.
that is
Sorry.
that is definitely something that a lot of people do, especially the guys from Seventh. We have a special forces unit here that focus primarily on South America. So the guys speak Spanish. They know, like a lot of them end up going that way. But you do also have contractors that go the other route. You have them that go and volunteer to help the Red Cross, or help refugees get out of, like, that does exist. It just doesn't get the press because it's not as interesting, I guess, to the average American.
This is really interesting because it makes me think a lot about how the left might be able to, I don't know, do some things in these types of instances, because we seem to have left a vacuum where these consultants go down a pipeline of becoming progressively more into like either piracy or into like doing a lot of unethical things across the globe. But if we had some sort of leftist organization or I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but something that allows them to move away from that and to something more progressive, or how we could even, like, the skills of military consultants would be so beneficial to our leftist movements. But I think that we just sort of dismiss a lot of these people or these kind of organizations and think, okay, there's no way in which we can do anything or work with this, or I guess because of our puritanicalness as well.
But also I would add, like, let's not underestimate like the other force that counters it, which is the profit motive and so on, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like, why do these contractors go to those other shitty, harmful jobs? Because they need to make a buck anyway. They need to make money, right?
Yeah, there are. I have often said that we are missing an opportunity not reaching out to ex-military, to two contractors, two people like this, because they're one of the, when you're talking about leftist groups in general, and when you talk about their organizing, it's, I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of, it's a meme about how hard it is to get people to organize, to get people to act. And a lot of it has to do with logistics. And these guys, it doesn't matter what they did, they know logistics. Because you have to. And I think they'd be really beneficial, but you do have to you got to break them out. Some of them, there are leftist contractors, as weird as that sounds. But they, getting
That's
them to the place where they're willing to actually start engaging and working and networking and organizing. I wish there was an easy way to do it, because they would be incredibly effective.
Yeah, in a way, it's our job to convince them. It's our job to convince everybody that what we're trying to do here is to try to have a better world for everybody. It's not, we don't have like a hidden agenda to be evil or something that, that whatever bullshit that the status quo has told them, but we're trying to build a better world for everybody. So hop on and, contribute.
Right. And generally, I mean, I think the one angle that you have that you can work with is that your average soldier, your average contractor, your average whatever, they're not fighting against the person in front of them. They're fighting for the people behind them. It's the way they look at it. So if you can take that and that motivation and bring it out of military conflict and bring it to social issues, you will create extremely effective activists, because they're incredibly motivated. So,
sorry, one sec. I'm just gonna raise the volume of this. Apparently, it's hard to hear me.
I didn't want to talk over anyone. That's it. Can I just ask? That's really interesting now. Hearing about like the ideological motivation. You were saying that there's leftist contractors and all this sort of stuff. You did touch on this earlier on, Beau, a little bit about how some people would be quite motivated. Some contractors would be quite motivated by ideology, and I'm quite I'm new to this sort of subject. I don't know that much about it. So, would you mind sort of diving into maybe your experience? Obviously, be as specific or vague as you'd like, but what sort of ideologies were motivating people in your experience? What was the sort of driving factors ideologically? Was it sort of some sort of American patriotism, or was it some sort of other vague ideas, or what was your experience with that?
You had a lot that was it was just canned American patriotism, in the sense of, there are still a lot of people, and this is, again, it's hard for those on the left to get, but there's a lot of people who still believe that capitalism brings freedom.
Oh yeah.
And there are a lot of people who who completely knew they were foot soldiers of some corporate entity, that were okay with it, because the way they looked at it was, this is horrible, but we're going to bring this country a functioning economy. We're going to bring them freedom. We're going to bring them mobility. And they don't stick around long enough to find out that that's not actually what happens when that government takes over. Then you have some people that do it long enough, and sometimes it doesn't even take that long, but they get exposed to all of these different countries. They get exposed to all of these different cultures, these different people, and they begin to realize that borders are not really a thing. And they become very anarchistic. There's one for you. You have contracting groups that will not work for governments. They will only work for private entities. That's extremely rare. I only know of two, and they're small groups. But the fact that they even exist is unique. And you find that, and then you also find the guys who are out doing something, and poaching is one that's really, I keep going back to it because it's incredibly common. You've got some guy, he's working in Africa, and he actually firsthand sees the effects of elephant poaching, or the effects of what the money that elephant poaching generates does. And then he, on a personal mission, goes off and stops poaching in a very contracty way, you know. And that has happened multiple times.
Cool.
And I mean, it's weird to think about these guys who really just, they can overlook the horrors of war all the time, but then they see something with an animal and it just, they lose it. And
Like when a dog dies in a film.
Yeah,
I mean, it's worth to look at all those mechanisms that make people deny those things.
and it just, that's one, and that has happened. With people that I know, that has occurred at least 3 times. Like where they're just like, okay, we're done, but we're gonna hang out here on the outside of this this preserve to deal with the rhino poach, and they just stay and do it for free, or they actually stop what they're doing to do that first. And it's common. And then you have people all the time that go somewhere, they start contracting, and then they end up helping the refugees from that area. And there are a lot of people that do that once, and then that becomes their job. And they don't want to do anything else. There's a lot of stuff that happens like that, where it just, the ideology changes, because I mean, getting shot at makes you realize what's actually important, you know.
Yeah.
And if you are self-aware and you self-critique, you'll start questioning a lot of your motives, and you will become even more radical than than you ever could by reading theory, you know. Because you see it firsthand. But
that's really interesting.
Do you think that, I know that you say, you've said before in some of your videos that you don't really like to say, you know, your one particular ideology as such, but would you say that this like real life experience has very much sort of changed your idea of the best type of strategies to bring about more like progressive society? I imagine it must have in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. You know, I talk about redundant power structures a lot, and the whole reasoning behind that is because what I have seen is that whatever structure is second place when the main structure falls, that's the one that gets in place. So if you were to have a structure that was centered on statelessness in place, when whatever structure exists there that is the dominant one, if it falls, the default would be to the one that already exists. That's why I push on that so much, is because if we can get that in place, we can literally just wait for the inevitable to happen. We don't have to radicalize people. We don't have to trigger anything, because eventually these structures will collapse. And if we have one built, that it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be even competing. It just has to exist. Mm-hmm. So when it falls, it can swing into action. It's something I've noticed over the years that is extremely effective. Mm-hmm. And I've also, as far as decentralization, you know, I mean, that's common anyway with my brand of ideology. But
have you noticed that in decentralization it contains the word decent?
Yeah.
It's the best argument for it I've ever heard.
You know what? I'm gonna put that on a shirt. That I like that. But yeah, decentralization is when you're out doing something that you don't want noticed. Decentralization is key. And then once you realize that it's also very efficient, where everybody's just acting on their own in pursuit of one goal, you realize that that's the way that a lot of political movements should be organized. You know, that's why it's very rare for me to do a call to action. I'll talk about something, but I don't want to say, oh, call your congressman or whatever, because somebody else may have a much better idea on how to achieve a result. But if I say that, that's what they do, and then they stop. There are people out there watching that channel that are a whole lot smarter than me that can come up with something better. And that's that. Those two things in particular, I know I brought from that world. But yeah, and I think that's true of anybody. And I do definitely know that my, let's just say, lack of total support for the institution of immigration checkpoints, that definitely came from that area.
Yeah,
because
fuck 'em very, very much. Fuck them very much.
yeah, there's a, once you go around and you realize it's never, nowhere I went, nothing I did, I was never fighting a person. I was never doing anything against a person. I was operating against a tool of the ruling establishment. And that transcended all borders. If that transcends all borders, that means that the people on the bottom also transcend those borders. And that, yeah. So, yeah, I can't believe I made it all the way through this so far and haven't actually used the A word. Actually pretty proud of myself right now.
I think that probably leads to a lot of the success of what you're doing on YouTube as well, though, because I think you're right in saying that a lot of these terms often immediately put people off, but if you actually explain what the stuff that you're talking about without using the words, most people will agree, or well, not most people, but a lot of people will agree generally with the idea, even people on the right, I think. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody at heart wants to run their own life. I mean, like it's such a perfect message when you boil it down to that point. So yeah, and I've noticed even people that are pretty astute politically within the United States, that is something that term, that philosophy doesn't get brought up very much. And when people hear it, they don't think philosophy, they think riot, and it's one of those things that eventually people will, if you talk about the ideas enough, they're going to realize that, oh, wow, this actually aligns with all of these ideas that I believe. And it's called, really? I didn't know that, I had an entirely different image of that word.
I remember I've seen recently this amazing documentary that was released by CNT, the Spanish organization which is now, as of today, it's a workers' union, basically. But there was this woman saying that anarchy is the other expression of order.
Mhm.
It's like order from below, from the people, from the people themselves bringing order around. So that's like the most solid order because nobody's going to disturb it. Something like that. It was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's and there's all the different hyphenated versions of it. But at the end of the day, the idea that people should run their own lives, that cooperation is better than competition.
Yes.
All of this stuff is stuff that people know to be true. They just don't think that it can be applied on a wide level because we're always told how horrible people are. And
yeah.
I mean, we just have to change the people are horrible. I mean, because there are a lot of horrible people, but we can fix that. So,
yeah, people are made horrible, but we're not horrible by default, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the right wing like to be taught that we're all inherently selfish from birth, so that we blame biology rather than blaming the system, which is obviously very beneficial to a lot of powerful people.
Oh, that's one of the shittiest arguments of the right, the homo homini lupus, and the saying, because nature is like this. So it's like a non sequitur. Okay, I'm done. Nature is like this. I know nature. I have coffee with nature every day. Fuck this shit.
Yeah, nature is like that, except for like ants and bees and a whole bunch of other things in nature. You know, like oh, that's
Even when
Don't even get me
biologically
started on
speaking,
bonobos.
it's like what the attributes that we give to animals of other species is what we made up for them to have as a motivation. So it's something, So when Sir Richard Attenborough gets a hard on the predators and the prey, it's his fascist inner self that is speaking to us, not the lion and that needs to eat and it's hungry, because they're hungry because whatever reasons, but it's not for us to give them a motive. It's like, fuck this shit.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
I also love what you were saying, because it does just make me think about how much, I don't know, a lot of our leftist movements today, often it's very much focused on protest or I don't know, somehow it just makes me think about how diversified our tactics could be, how many different types of things that we could do, people we could appeal to. I mean, obviously there are so many different types of leftist organizations all across the globe. I don't want to generalize too much, but definitely, with military consultants and things like that. And I don't know, I guess this is part of the liberal co-optation of a lot of leftist organizing. So it's a lot to do with appearing woke, or so you can look good on your social media feeds, and a lot of that feeds into a lot of the struggles that people want to get involved in. But still, yeah, I think we all need to sort of radically use our imaginations, thinking beyond the box of what we have been taught so far about what leftist organizing looks like and what is possible for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have so much homework to do. It's where to start. It's like when you get your house for whatever reason is trashed, and it's where should I start? The living room, the kitchen, or and it's so many of us that we can start whenever we want, and
Yeah. Also, I don't know how much more time you will have, but I thought it might be interesting also to talk a bit about going back to Venezuela, the history of what has gone on in Venezuela. I like what you said in one of your videos, Beau, about the fact that it's easy to be informed, but it's harder to learn all the history that you need to know in order to understand the current situation. And I think that's very true. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the history of what happened in Venezuela, especially in terms of the fact, Spanish colonization and how that has led to the situation today.
I'm actually I am short on time, but I'm also I am not a area expert on it. Not enough to distill it down to the key points that really matter, with the exception of what Javi's already covered, as far as the Maduro Chavez, that chain of events leading back to that, and the fact that we are exerting pressure via the economy. Those are the key elements that people need. Now, if they want to get into why that's happening, you're going to end up going back to go back to a lot of the narco stuff in the 80s with the Cali cartel and stuff like that. But again, I don't have a strong enough read on the cultural aspects of the Venezuelans. I can only do it from a military standpoint. And I don't know that would be beneficial, because what I know would end up kind of reinforcing this idea that our moves have been right, but they clearly haven't when you look at the people, But I don't have enough read on the people to be able to explain it. I think the worst thing you can do for an idea is defend it poorly. So I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's totally fair enough. I think Mexi actually has a really good video about Venezuela, where she traces some of the history of what's going on in the region. So yeah, people should definitely check that out. But yeah, we could.
It's also very difficult. Sorry, just that now that we're on this topic, it's also very difficult because now in the post-truth thing, it's like everybody's vindicating the figure of the Libertador of Simón Bolívar, and it's both the right wing and the left wing, because there's this thing in Latin America in general, because and all colonized countries, you would have something to say about it, Paul.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Links nationalism to independence, to liberation. And it's like kind of a different nationalism. We've been through, and actually you made an excellent. You made a video about it, right?
Thanks. Have you a little plug there? Yeah, if you want to check out Irish socialist republicanism, if you want to learn a little bit more about that and the history of it, I've got a full video on my channel about that. If anyone wants to have a little look about that and learn about the left wing nationalism of Ireland and its history. But anyway, I didn't want to detract from what you were saying.
In Latin America, yeah, no, absolutely. That's because I remember you have, and that's why you have a big saying about this as a colonized country person. But it's a different way of thinking things, and at this point, I would like to just reivindicate the figure of Hugo Chavez, because he took his country out of a very difficult, tough spot. And he was a man of humble origins, and fuck that shit, expropiese, motherfuckers. That's all I got.
He did amazing stuff. Yeah, he did amazing stuff. Poverty dropping from 70% to 21%, in the course of 15 years. Unbelievable things, loads of nationalizations. And as you said, very moderate as well. Very, really, I mean, when people talk about democratic socialism, I mean, it was democratically elected. It was a popular movement. It was left-wing populism and that sort of thing. But yeah, it wasn't like a coup or anything like that, So yeah, relatively moderate, despite what we've been told.
Yeah.
For any of the right-wing people that are tuning into this, just for whatever reason, because you're following me, I would strongly suggest checking out a video on republicanism in Ireland, because I'll tell you, y'all got some. Those words don't mean the same thing here and there.
Oh, no, they don't. Jesus.
Oh, no, they don't. Same here in Spain, huh?
Radical left-wing egalitarian movement here, and it has been since the late 1700s. So very, very different. If you hear Irish Republicans, very, very different situation. But anyway, I don't want to divert the conversation too much. But yeah, definitely.
Well, if we want to wrap it up, I guess I just wanted to ask you a final question, Beau, because I love that at the end of your interviews you ask people what is one thing that you would recommend people do. So I thought I'd turn it around and ask you what you think.
Oh. Man, you asked me. I was not prepared for that.
Sorry.
No, local organization. Local organization. Build a network of, even if it's only just 8 people, a network within your local community that has a expressed purpose in making things better. Because it doesn't matter what you can do as an individual. What you can accomplish as a group is going to be bigger. So that would be my one thing.
What?
I should have seen that coming.
Could we do a quick round of Q&As, because I think people in the chat were looking to ask questions. I don't know if that would be possible.
Yeah, I got a few.
Did you keep track of the chat? I think it was.
Yeah.
I think Michaela was asking if there were like legal procedures to have contractors internationally being accountable for actions.
Only if they violate the standard laws of war. And oddly enough, normally contractors are more. They are more aware and follow those more closely because they have no immunity from a government. So that it's rare that it happens. In fact, the most recent time that I can think of is the incident in Iraq with the Blackwater guys. And I think the U.S. stepped in and protected them when they probably shouldn't have. But that it's there are a few mechanisms in place as far as their behavior, but not in the sense of who they work for and how they get there and that kind of stuff. Which that may be something that would be a good idea, to have some kind of international control on it, kind of similar to like the arms limitations agreements. But it would be hard to enforce. So.
Someone, Pause asked, what lessons, if any, do you take from the Standing Rock NODAPL incident?
Man. I would say that to not give up, in the sense of I think that there was a glimmer of hope with the Obama administration, and I think that it dulled resolve. And if you're in a situation like that, I would suggest that you stay committed to it and understand that you are probably the only people that actually care. That the government, any government entity that is going to say, "Oh yeah, we're with you," they're not. They're not. Not when you're talking about money at that level. And then as far as the tactics, I have always been more of a supporter of mobile things rather than static things. But again, it's a little different when you're where they were at. They didn't have a lot of options. I don't know that they chose to be static. I think they kind of had to be. So.
Okay. And someone, Chris Bentley asked, I understand that Beau is ex-contractor, but how did he get into it?
Oh, that's something we should have gone over. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different routes to get into contracting. The most common is you worked for an army. Another one is that you worked for a law enforcement agency or an intelligence agency or something like that. Another way to get into it is you're an academic of some sort. You have an expertise in a certain area. From an academic standpoint, they bring you in as a consultant, an advisor, and then as time goes on, you end up actually out in the field. And rather than the way most contractors arrive learning to shoot, or they know how to shoot and do that stuff and have to learn the geopolitical stuff, you show up knowing the geopolitical stuff and have to learn the shooting. Another way to get involved in it would be a use of a special skill that is not necessarily trying to think of something like, okay, let's say you're a fixed wing pilot. That alone, in the right circumstance, can get you in your foot in the door, and then you pick up the other skills along the way. A lot of these contracting companies have schools that they will send you to teach or to learn how to do some of the other stuff. I know one guy who was a guide, and he got hired on to guide these people up a river. His only actual experience in anything like this, other than being a guide, was he was a game warden for like 2 years. And then he went on from there. He got hired. When they left, he went with them. They wound up sending him to a school, a private school. And as far as I know, he may still be with the company. As far as how I got into it, I got asked. I got asked if I was interested.
Hi, Beau.
And I was bored, and the guy kind of made it sound like, "Hey, we're gonna teach you to be James Bond," and I was like, "Yeah." I didn't see a single casino the entire time.
Casinos are overrated anyway. They're miserable little places where people lose their money.
Right.
We have a couple of more questions. I think Michaela Smith is asking about the Nisour Square massacre. If it did change the contracting world at all, especially for people on the ground, and are contractors perceived differently since?
I don't think as much as it should have. There were a lot of, I think the large corporate guys, the people that were working for those companies, I think they may have gotten a small reality check. But I think most of the private, the more private groups, I think they were almost a little let down by it, by what happened, because there wasn't a massive accountability. And to them, again, the smaller companies strive for professionalism, generally speaking. There are exceptions to that, obviously, but when you see something like that go down and then nobody's really held accountable to the extreme that they should, it's kind of disheartening to those people who wanted a professional image for their industry.
Cool. So we got another question from Lorcan Nagel saying the idea of law enforcement agents becoming PMCs when a lot of cops are people who failed the test to get into the military is terrifying. Yeah, okay. That's more a comment than actually a question.
Yeah, there's actually a whole lot of people who end up working for private companies, especially the big ones, that really shouldn't. I mean, there's a lot that is actually unnerving. There was a large company that was taking people who said they had military experience, but was not checking to see if they had a DD-214, which is like your transcript from the military. So you had people just showing up and saying, "Yeah, I was a ranger," and they were never even in the military, much less a ranger. And there's a lot that is not great.
They may be Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all with the questions. I think.
I think that's everything. Is there any last comments that anyone wanted to make before we wrap it up?
I don't know. I kind of want to sing, but.
Oh yeah, sing for us.
You can sing us out.
I don't know. No, just yeah. I mean, I'm gonna repeat again, like Comandante Chávez presente. Expropiese, motherfucker. That could be a very good catchphrase. Expropiese, motherfucker. Like.
Hard to agree.
Motherfucker. Beau, thank you so much for coming. Honestly, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I literally had barely any idea about military consultancy before this, so it's genuinely been so interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on as well. I know you have like a huge channel, so it's really nice of you to come onto our like baby YouTube channel. So.
But it's a good channel though. See, that's the thing. It's high quality.
There you go.
And I would, yeah. But
quality
no,
over quantity.
It was a great idea to talk. In fact, just for everybody who's listening, this didn't come up because of Venezuela. This came up because this was asked about beforehand, and I think it was pretty insightful to go ahead and start lining something like this up. Anyway, all right. So. Yeah. I will see you guys later.
Cheers, Beau. Thanks very much for coming on. Cheers, everyone. Take care.
I know.
We can still be live.
Cool. There you go. You got
cheers, everyone in the chat.
See groove.
Thank you so much.